On a surface level, the similarities between the Pokémon and Mother series seem pretty obvious, and there are some definite connections between the two. One I really love to point out is the similarities between Mother 3's love theme and Pokémon Black and White's Ends Farewell. Intentional? Possibly. I can see why people point this out, but on the flip side, the first 5 notes are also the exact same as 8 melodies from Mother 1. Another similarity between the 3 games are elements of their stories, which both deal with twins and dragons. Remember the forest shrine painting of the black and white dragons in Mother 3? Some have theorized that Pokemon Black and White are actually Mother 4, and that the dragon from Mother 3 is the one dragon that split into these two, because they're dumb.
The games also share similarity in their structure, which both see the player travelling a large world in search of 8 special things, though this has much less to do with any of the existing connections between the games, and more so with 8 commonly being seen as a lucky number in Japanese culture. In Pythagorean numerology, 8 means victory or prosperity, essentially conveying a sense of completeness, which makes a lot of sense when trying to suggest a sense of growing stronger and a full journey to a player.
Speaking of, at the very beginning of Pokemon Red and Blue, a connection between the series exists. Though it goes unused, one of the options for Red's original default names was Ninten, the name of Mother 1's protagonist. Though there's some debate over whether this could really be considered a reference or not, regardless of its unused status. First, the use of the name Ninten as a protagonist name in Nintendo products was actually quite common as a placeholder name in the 80s and 90s. And was only adopted as the Mother series character's official name in 2008 with the release of Super Smash Bros. Brawl via the Stickers feature. And secondly is that this name is complementary to Blue's unused name, Sony, indicating it's more likely to just be an in-joke about the two companies. EarthBound also has an item called the Bag of Dragonite, which turns the user into a dragon that deals massive damage for 1 turn. Though often attributed as an inspiration for the Generation 1 dragon type, there's no actual official connection. The name for the item itself was actually a product of Marcus Lindblom's localization of EarthBound. In the original Mother 2, it was simply referred to as Dragon Power. So the question then becomes, where does Dragonite's name come from? In Japanese, Dragonite's name is Kairu, which means sea or wide and large. Basically, it's Sea Dragon. So where the hell did Dragonite come from?
One of the most common points of comparison between these two franchises are the appearances of Mewtwo and Geek from Mother 1. Although there's no definitive evidence of the former's design being influenced by the latter's, it's not that huge of a jump to make. They even both strike back. It does somewhat seem to be acknowledged by Nintendo, however, with Mewtwo being one of the last fights in Lucas's classic mode in Smash Ultimate. In general, Smash is the only time the two franchises have ever been officially linked, with Lucas and Pokemon Trainer being paired up in the Subspace Emissary mode in Brawl. Although they have rarely crossed paths, the two franchises have a long shared history. Shigesato Itoi's company, Ape, was founded in March 1987 as a joint venture between him and Nintendo, specifically for the creation of the first Mother game. And its creation was facilitated by then-President Hiroshi Yamauchi after receiving Itoi's proposal for the premise of the game. Ape often received help from Pax Softnica, a second-party development studio for Nintendo, who worked on many notable games for them, such as Donkey Kong and much later, Pokémon Snap.
After Mother was completed, Ape proceeded into an assistance role for other games development, as well as making guidebooks, but got working on a prototype for Mother 2, or EarthBound, soon after. And in 1991, during EarthBound's development, Tsunekazu Ishihara joined the company as a producer and even became its CEO. He'll be important later, remember him. As many know, Mother 2's development was rough. It took a lot of time and resources, saw several threats of cancellation, and even had to be restarted practically from scratch several years in. But through hard work, love, and lots of help from Satoru Iwata, the game was released in 1994. and after the many struggles the game saw, the Ape development team was disbanded.
Ape as a company then saw some reshuffling, and in 1995, Ishihara, with several former Ape staff members, formed Creatures Incorporated, who would then assist in the development of Pokémon Red and Green on the Game Boy. Funnily enough, it was Itoi himself who named the Game Boy. The two games were being directed by Nintendo up-and-comer Satoshi Tajiri. Him and Ishihara's formed partnership had been a long time coming. The two had gotten along for some time and had already worked on video game projects together before. Creatures was officially formed in 1995, and by this point, Pokémon Red and Green had already been in development for 5 years. Development had taken a long time due to the scale of the project, trying to fit it all on a Game Boy, and the small size of the development team.
There was also a lot of skepticism over the project by Nintendo higher-ups, but Mr. Video Games himself saw a great potential and really helped its development continue. Miyamoto had lots of faith in Tajiri, and had been a sort of mentor to him, though Miyamoto himself won't claim any of that credit. With so much uncertainty and struggles in development, no one knew what the fate of the project would be. Then, in 1996, it was released.
Pokémon is an undeniable obsession with children across the country.
And this is going to be one of the hottest selling toys for the holidays. This is a talking Pikachu.
Pokémon is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the movie makes its debut nationwide tomorrow.
It's Pokemania everywhere. Sales of trading cards, toys, and video games surpassed $500 million in the U.S. Another $4 billion was sold overseas.
Following Pokemon's massive success, Creatures, Nintendo, and Game Freak joined to create what is now known as the Pokémon Company, which handles pretty much everything Pokémon, as one might imagine. Ishihara then became the president of it, while Mother 1 and 2 composer Hirokazu Chip Tanaka became the longtime president of Creatures Incorporated. In fact, the two held these positions in their respective companies up until April of 2023, with Ishihara then also taking over the CEO position as well, and Tanaka stepping down from his role, now serving as a creative fellow for the company.
Despite all of this, no, Ape is not gone. Many seem to think that either Ape was closed or turned into Creatures, but this is not the case. Ape still exists to this very day. However, its role has been drastically reduced from what it used to be. For the most part, they just manage their own IPs, including Mother, and act as an affiliate company with both Nintendo and Hobonichi. Itoi himself is still the CEO to this day. Creatures is seen as a successor to Ape in terms of function. Fittingly, Ape's final official guidebook was the official guidebook for Pokémon Red, Green, and Blue.
Creatures was also initially involved in the development of Mother 3 for the N64, assigned to do character modeling work, but when the game eventually ended up being developed for the GBA, HAL Labs moved on without their involvement. This was likely since in the many years since Mother 3's initial development, Creatures had become an exponentially bigger company, and with their focus on so much Pokemon stuff, Itoi likely felt more comfortable with HAL Labs, being able to be closer with his good friend Satoru Iwata as well.
Aside from all this history, the two series also have connections preceding the Pokémon series' inception. Prior to his mega franchise, Satoshi Tajiri actually reviewed video games, both writing a column and appearing on television to do so. Itoi even introduced his segment once.
このアーケードゲームを研究している田尻君のたくさんのコレクションからいくつか珍しいゲームをご紹介しましょう。
One of the games he reviewed was the original Mother for the NES. So let's look through his review and see how his points hold up several decades later. Tajiri opens the review by talking about his recent experience seeing Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade at the theater, and talks about cinematic art forms like movies needing to be experienced at the theater and not being as good on his 14-inch TV set. He uses this to segue into praising Mother's highly cinematic elements, drawing comparisons to the work of Steven Spielberg, which works on multiple levels as Spielberg is the director of The Last Crusade, and his works were a notable influence on the Mother series.
A great point to make, as one of Mother's strongest elements that would go on to influence the storytelling of the rest of the series and several games down the road is its cinematic influences, and this progression can even be seen when the series was attempting to transition to 3D. These were used to elevate the story though, not replace its video game attributes, seen in its integration of gameplay with its more cinematic moments, and would also prove to be one of the Mother series' most influential components. Though cinematics weren't unique to it, the series' sentimental nature is something that clearly resonated with Tajiri, as Pokémon would go on to attempt to craft a similar emotional sentiment, with a focus on close bonds between the player and a world similar to theirs, and young kids being able to overcome incredible feats with their friends. Not saying it was his only inspiration, but with the amount of overlap between the series' staffs, it shouldn't be underplayed either.
Then he gets to the game, which he describes as having several flimsy areas. Tajiri critiques the large map, saying its sheer size can be quite overwhelming, and doesn't work once it becomes confusing, saying the realism should be toned down for caricature. That's one lie that's forgiven in video games. This would have been an unpopular critique at the time, as its large scale was generally praised as impressive, despite Tajiri's valid arguments against it.
Film student over here busting out the Kubrick stuff, because it's true. The filmmaker Stanley Kubrick once said, "You don't take the picture, you take the picture of the picture." That you exaggerate certain aspects to make something work better both artistically and to favor the experience of the person consuming the art. This is for one simple reason. Real life is boring and not fun. Even realistic works have to sort of contort themselves in order to remain interesting to an audience.
Your mission is to infiltrate the jungle and capture all of the monkeys.
It's hard to imagine just how big the map would have been considered then, but it was, and I agree with this critique. Some of the areas are just way too big for no good reason other than to be intentionally confusing or to pad portions with random encounters. Not uncommon in RPGs of the time, but not really good design either. Pokemon's map layout was left much more straightforward. There was exploration for sure, but usually this manifested in alternate but still linear routes or branches off the main path. You'd return to areas to get to new ones, but the very helpful map helped the player to keep things straight along with very little reason to return to certain areas for extended periods of time, zeroing the focus in on the remaining locations, to which the player could figure out where to go through the process of elimination, though it still had its share of somewhat unclear moments. It also helped its cities and towns have pretty distinct layouts, while Mother's... they look different, sure, but while Pokémon, which was in black and white originally, mind you, has distinct map layouts and landmarks, and was done on much more limited hardware, Mother's towns, while small enough to not get lost in, not only lack some clarity on what certain places are, they also lack the comparative personality Kanto's locations exude. And a lot of that, in my opinion, has to do with there being much less music in Mother's overworld. There's enough variance, but while Kanto feels like a world, America feels like a video game level. The rhyme and reason to its layout doesn't seem purposeful in terms of leading the player through it. Stuff strewn in places many wouldn't even think to look, but not in a fun exploration sense, more of a why is this here sense. The developers themselves even seem to agree, as seen in Mother 1+2's map changes, and was also immensely improved in EarthBound and Mother 3.
Tajiri goes on to crack down on the game's balancing, though not necessarily in the way you would expect. He breaks it down into archetypal elements, stating the hierarchy of enemies is unclear. By this he means things like the perceived size of an enemy, helping players to instinctively know which enemies are stronger than others, which Mother lacks, citing specifically that the smaller rope enemy is stronger than the car enemies, and even the stronger cars become dwarfed by bears statistically. He ties this into his point about the map, and how it makes the world feel disorganized.
A really interesting point. While Mother's balancing has always been a contentious issue amongst players and has resulted in many even setting out to attempt to fix it themselves, the understanding of power levels hasn't ever been much of a problem for me. I understand where he's coming from in comparing the cars and bears, but I sort of understand internally that a bear coming up and attacking you with its razor-sharp claws could potentially be even more damaging than being hit by a car, but that's really more about how individuals understand these things, you know? And I think this is a fair critique of this argument, as his as well comes down to feelings. Instincts the player has about such things. Not right or wrong necessarily, but I think the real problem lies in the overall balancing of the enemies all around.
今ホーリーローリーマウンテンにいるんですけどってのは一番多いと思いますけどね。テスト調整のところでいいやっつって。
This problem lingered with the series too, with EarthBound being notable for several random difficulty spikes as well, though better than the first. Mother 3, on the other hand, basically obliterated this problem for the most part, and just saying, the only entry in this series where this isn't a problem just happens to be the one Itoy didn't direct. Though I love these games, I do just think Itoy is a better storyteller than he is a game designer, but he still has his moments of truly genius decision making.
Balancing is also something that the Pokemon series has had its ups and downs with, but for the most part it seems pretty decent in Red and Green. Red and Green's problems with balancing don't lie in what levels enemies are, or which Pokemon the trainers are using. It's that Gen 1 is completely broken. For example, if you get Frozen, you will never thaw out unless the opponent uses Haze or a Fire type move. A great strategy if you have a Pokemon with Blizzard. Wrap, Blind, Fire Spin, and Clamp were also totally broken, completely immobilizing the victim for up to 5 turns. Psychic moves were overpowered too, since Ghost type moves did next to nothing. Psychic attacks were only resisted by other Psychic Pokemon. Breaking a substitute with a move that has a secondary effect will remove that secondary effect for the rest of the battle. Meaning if you break a substitute with a move that has recoil, that move will no longer have recoil. Hyper Beam no longer needs to recharge. Explosion no longer instantly KOs the user. And of course these are all bugs, not flawed intentional design. But these are annoying problems. And though they did get fixed over time, there have been many other balancing issues that have plagued the Pokemon franchise. His next point of contention is a lack of direction, finding NPCs to be unhelpful. He breaks down the role of NPC dialogue into 2 categories: hints and color. He brings up hearing that the development team ran out of memory halfway through development.
Can't find a source on this, but frankly they're both in the industry and worked with the same people, so I trust him. Anyway.
Because of this, he believes many more helpful lines were cut, while much of the flavor text was spared. And while it makes the game more unique, it also leaves the player at a loss. And overall, what he refers to as not very kind.
Yeah, this is a valid one. Another instance of a problem that was heavily mended in the sequels. And while Pokemon does offer more frequent and explicit help to players, it'd be a lie to suggest it hasn't oftentimes lacked subtlety in its writing. This is something honestly both games could come closer to the side of the other one on.
Possibly the most interesting, he suggests that Mother as a whole might not be suited for the medium of video games, suggesting that it may have been more appropriate as a novel or a movie. Although, as Itoy said, I dared to break the 10 commandments of video game design. Tajiri, however, objected that there even was a 10 commandments of video games, with how wide the disparity between good and bad games is. Those rules were yet to be properly defined. He ends on an optimistic note, saying this is a good thing and keeps the future of video games exciting. Despite their differences in approach, both Itoy and Tajiri created widely loved works that have resonated with people for decades and attempted and succeeded at pushing the boundaries of what could work for a video game, despite the many doubts expressed around them. Itoy created Mother as a way to connect with the daughter he was afraid to lose, and Tajiri created Pokémon to tap back into the days of his childhood that he missed.
While they certainly differ in their attitudes when designing games, seeing how much they diverge only to result in some remarkable similarities, that's really something. It goes to show no matter what it is that's being created, the most important element in making something people will love is the heart you put into it. You take the parts of what makes you, you, and do your best to do what you think is right. No matter your philosophy. Simply,
express yourself.